Hello, everyone, and welcome to Penn Faulkner's first literary conversation of the season, Choice. My name is Beth Ann Patrick. I'm the Programs Committee Chair at the Penn Faulkner Foundation, and I'm so excited to have you here with us tonight. For those of you joining us for the first time, what you should know about Penn Faulkner is that we are a nonprofit literary foundation based in Washington, D.C., with a mission of celebrating literature and fostering connections between readers and writers to enrich and inspire individuals and communities. We fulfill our mission by administering 3 national literary awards: the Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction, the Penn Malamud Award for Excellence in the Short Story, and the Penn Faulkner Literary Champion Award, as well as through our education programs, which bring free books and author visits to DC public and public charter schools, and our Literary Conversation series, which starts its new season tonight. A couple of notes about this evening's webinar. We're providing live captions tonight. You can toggle them on and off using the CC button at the bottom of your screen. There will be a short Q&A session at the end of the event, so please submit your questions. You can start now using the Q&A button also at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get to all of them in the time we have. You should also know that you can upvote questions, and so if you see something from someone else that you really think is terrific, give it a little lift. We're very proud to have adopted a pay-what-you-will model for our literary conversations in order to increase accessibility to our programs during these tough times. All right, it's time to get this conversation started, and we're so honored to have some incredible folks joining us tonight. I'm going to introduce them in alphabetical order. Elisa Albert, our moderator, is the author of Human Blues, Afterbirth, The Book of Dahlia, How This Night is Different, and editor of the anthology Freud's Blind Spot. Her stories and essays have appeared in Time, The Guardian, The New York Times, N+1, Bennington Review, Tin House, Michigan Quarterly Review, The Literary Review, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and elsewhere. She lives in upstate New York. R.O. Kwon's nationally best-selling first novel, The Incendiaries, is being translated into 7 languages and was named a Best Book of the Year by over 40 publications. The Incendiaries was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle John Leonard Award and the Los Angeles Times Art Seidenbaum Prize, as well as 5 other prizes. Kwon and Garth Greenwell co-edited the best-selling anthology Kink, recipient of the inaugural Joy Award and a New York Times notable book. Joanne Ramos was born in the Philippines and moved to Wisconsin when she was 6. She graduated with a BA from Princeton University. After working in investment banking and private equity investing, she became a staff writer at The Economist. She currently serves on the board of The Moth and lives in New York City with her family. The Farm, her debut novel, is a national bestseller and has been chosen by over 50 media outlets in America and abroad as a must-read from 2019. The Farm was longlisted for the Center for Fiction's 2019 First Novel Prize. Leni Zumas was a finalist for the 2021 John Dos Passos Prize for Literature. Her best-selling novel, Red Clocks, won the Oregon Book Award and was shortlisted for the Orwell Prize for Political Fiction and the Neucom Award for Speculative Fiction. She lives in Oregon and teaches at Portland State University. And with that, I have the great pleasure of turning this over to Elisa Albert, who will introduce our panelists and get all of our discussion started. Thank you, Elisa.
Thank you, Beth Ann. Welcome, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you to the Penn Faulkner Foundation for having us. Joanne, Reese, Leni, I have been immersed in your worlds for the past couple weeks in a very unusual way. I don't think I've ever read 3 novels concurrently, like in tandem, the way that I've been reading yours. They've been very, very front and center in conversation in my mind. I've picked up one, read 10, 20, 50 pages, put it down, picked up another, round and round and round. It's been a very singular experience for me, and it lent a real immediacy to the way your themes and your voices and your stories intersect and overlap. And it made all the issues therein not quite as theoretical as I think they would have felt if I had read them one at a time. So it's been a great opportunity to sort of experience a new way of consuming narrative. So thank you for that also, Penn Faulkner Foundation. It's been a great opportunity. Welcome. I'm curious to know, Reese, Leni, and Joanne, if you have read each other and if you've met each other or crossed paths over the past few years as your books have come into the world.
I've actually met both Reese and Leni when in 2019 when I was on book tour. So Leni and I met in Calgary, and we were in Pennsylvania, right, Reese? I think it was one of the first events that I did for my book. Yeah.
So you're familiar with each other's work.
Nice to see everyone again.
And you're aware of how your work interacts with each other's to some degree. Interesting. Okay. Well, I am new to all of you, and I'm just thrilled to be here with you tonight. I want to start by just laying the groundwork and interrogating some very basic words, and hopefully we can keep this idea in our minds as we continue our discussion. So words like parent, freedom, love, mother, and choice, the last of which has been so oft repeated, especially in the past few weeks and months, that sometimes we have to kind of like press pause and remind ourselves of like what it actually means, as so often is the case when something is repeated too often. So these words can be both either verbs or nouns. When these words are verbs, they are active and they require inhabitation. They don't exist on their own. They're not static objects. They're fluid, they're in motion, and they have to be inhabited somehow. When these words are nouns, they are by definition passive. What does it mean to be a parent? It can mean any number of things, not all of them very useful or positive or particularly meaningful. Ditto mother or love or choice. What is choice in a vacuum? What is choice as an abstract, as a passive thing that one is said to have or not have? It's an important part of having this conversation, I think, that we keep interrogating these words and we keep questioning for ourselves and for each other and for our communal existence, what they are, what they mean, and how we're using them. Okay, so that said, Joanne, I'm wondering if you can give us a snapshot of your novel.
Sure, I would love to. Just to give a little bit of context, the farm is a place, Golden Oaks, and it is the most luxurious spa that you've ever imagined. And it's a place where the women who are partaking in the organic food, the massages, the best doctors, they're all women who are hired to carry the babies of the richest people in the world. So in this excerpt, Jane is a young Filipino mom who's left her own baby daughter at home to take a job at this facility. And the reason she's doing it, and it is her choice, but to Elisa's point, I guess we have to question what that really means. It's her first day on this job, and she's doing it because you can make a ton of money as long as you deliver a healthy baby for the billionaires who hire you. So this is Jane's first day on the job. Also, Mei Yu, who will be mentioned, is the Asian American woman who runs the place. Right wrist, please. Sleeves up, says the coordinator. It is Jane's first day. Her interview at Golden Oaks was only 6 weeks ago, but in that time, everything has changed. An unknown baby lies in her stomach, and she's 100 miles away from Amalia, surrounded by strangers. The smiling woman who greeted her in the dorm's lobby this morning, took not only her suitcase and wallet, but her cell phone. So Jane has no sense of the time, whether she has been at Golden Oaks 1 hour or 7. Jane rolls up her sleeve and extends her arm, wondering if she's getting another shot and why, since she is already pregnant. The coordinator straps a bracelet onto Jane's wrist, rubber, or at least rubbery looking, and pushes a button that makes its thin, rectangular screen light up. This is a well band, custom made for us. I gave you red because it was just Valentine's Day. Jane stares at it. Mrs. Carter used to wear something similar, a circle of blue plastic like a child's toy that looked strange next to her diamond tennis bracelet, the gleaming ovals of her nails. It tracks your activity levels. Try jumping. Jane begins to jump. See? The coordinator angles the bracelet face towards Jane. The green zeros that had once filled the screen have been replaced by orange numbers that climb steadily as Jane hops, growing short of breath. You can stop, says the coordinator, but in a friendly way. She holds Jane's wrist and guides the bracelet over a reader attached to a laptop until the reader bleeps. There, now you're synced up with our data management team. Let's say your heart rate spikes. This happens, it's usually no biggie, but can also signal some underlying irregularity in your heart, pregnancy being a strain on your TikToker. The coordinator, Carla, pauses, waiting for the severity of this possibility to set in. We'll know immediately, can whisk you in to see the nurse. Or if you're not getting enough exercise, we'll have Hannah all over it. Carla grins. All over you. Hannah? She's our wellness coordinator. Oh, you'll get to know her real well. Carla winks at Jane. She runs through a tutorial of the well band, its various monitors, timers, the alarm and snooze and panic buttons, the GPS locator, calendar alerts, how to receive announcements. How do you like the clothes? Carla's eyes rake over Jane, head to toe and back up again. Jane feels her face grow hot. In truth, she has never worn clothes so thin and so soft. Just this morning in her winter coat, she was freezing, but here, in clothes light as air, Jane is warm. Jane says so to Carla. Oh, cashmere, Carla answers matter-of-factly. Golden Oaks doesn't skimp, that's for sure. There's a knock on the open door. Hi, Jane, sings Miss Yu. Oh, hello, Miss Yu. Jane jumps to her feet. Please sit. I just wanted to make sure you're settling in. Miss Yu takes a seat on the bench next to Jane. How's the morning sickness? Is your room okay? Did you meet Reagan? I feel okay, only a little tired, Jane answers. The room is beautiful, so are the clothes. I have not yet met my roommate. Miss Yu frowns slightly. But, Jane says quickly, not meaning to get her roommate into trouble, I had the check-in with the nurse and the orientation. I've been busy. Miss Yu's face relaxes. She places a hand on Jane's hand. I'm guessing Reagan was just tied up. She'll be around soon, I think. This is your new home. We want to help you feel at home. At the word home, Jane's throat tightens. She wonders what Amalia is doing, whether she notices her mother is gone. As if sensing Jane's thoughts, Miss Yu asks, how's Amalia? Was the goodbye hard? Jane is pierced by gratitude that Miss Yu, who is so busy, remembers Amalia's name. She shifts her gaze to the wall. It was fine. Amalia's almost 7 months now. She's a big girl, and she has my cousin. She's in good hands then. Miss Yu's voice is kind. Jane still does not trust herself to face Miss Yu. I know you know our policy, Jane, which is that we don't allow visitors and we don't allow hosts off-site unless at the request of a client. Miss Yu leans close to whisper, but I think we can convince your client to let Amalia come see you. Really, Jane blurts? Miss Yu puts a finger to her lips and smiles. She asks Jane if she's ready for lunch, and when Jane confesses she was too nervous this morning to eat, leads her to the dining hall. Jane trails several steps behind, wiggling her toes in her new fur-lined moccasins, a tentative sense of well-being creeping over her. Do you think you'll feel at home here? Miss Yu asks. She pushes the dining room door open with her shoulder. Oh, yes, says Jane, and she means it.
Thank you. Bravo. What a page turner you wrote. And so densely populated with so many interesting people at such cross purposes. Really loved it. You know, the fact that the farm probably doesn't exist right now yet, which I find hard to believe. I feel like it probably does, and we don't know about it. The commodification aspect is already here. It's fully here. This is not outlandish at all. Can you talk a little bit about where the idea came from and how it germinated, for lack of a better term, in you? The creative process and reproductive process parallel metaphor issue is inescapable, but we'll do our best within it.
Well, so there were questions that I was interested in exploring, but I couldn't quite find a way into them. So it was everything from motherhood. I was a new mother, and I had the privilege of being able to hire someone to help me care for my baby. And that person was from the Philippines. I'm also from the Philippines. I was born there. And so to some degree, it was trying to imagine myself into our nanny's life, where she's taking care of my kids and she left her kids. Her kids were actually in Queens, but she never saw them because she worked so much. I met so many other people, many of whom I now, not many, but let's say half a dozen, I now consider friends who are domestic workers. The only Filipinas I knew at that time that I was intimate with, that I saw on a daily basis, were domestic workers. And yet I was also a Filipino who's been called American Dream a million times in my life. And so it's these ideas of meritocracy and what that means, motherhood, freedom, free choice, free will, what that really means in a capitalistic society. I want to explore that, and I just couldn't find my way in.
Yeah.
I was writing all these very bad stories about dog walkers with rich clients, like terrible stuff, but I just couldn't get in until I read a little article about a surrogacy facility in India. So these things exist, or they did exist. It's now banned in India and Thailand because of corruption and people leaving babies there when they weren't perfect. The only thing I did, and this is why it was funny to me in a way that all the articles would say it was dystopian, I didn't set out to write a dystopia. I set out to write a realistic story based on a real thing that happened. And all I did was I amped it and I made it luxury. And being someone who was in banking and having a certain life, like, that's not so far off. Everyone, you walk down the streets of New York, you see $3,000 strollers zooming by and people trying to give their kids an edge. The only thing I did is I made that edge start in utero by hiring women, not just to care for your babies from the Philippines and other places, but to actually carry the baby.
And that's not dystopian either. That's very much here. That's, you made it super highly organized and you turned it into a spa, which, if it did exist, if the farm did exist today in the Hudson Valley, an hour south of where I live in the crap hole Rust Belt of upstate, I don't think we'd know about it. They wouldn't be advertising it, and the ultra wealthy who do outsource pregnancy domestically, at least, are for sure taking primo care of their vessels, incubators, surrogates, call them what you will. Is it a corporate scheme? We don't know. But
I don't think it is yet, but that was, again, the idea, it's just an inch from reality, I think.
Yeah.
If that, especially now.
Yeah. There's a passage on page 48 in my copy. I won't make you read it, but Reagan, the character of Reagan, who's a pretty privileged white girl who opts to do this as a kind of an FU to her class-obsessed, money-obsessed, status-obsessed father, because she doesn't want to just be like a trust fund kid. She wants to do something important on her own. So she's not doing it out of necessity. She's kind of confused about the ethics and the sort of moral, superiority of it. Yes, but it could be that one party has no other options. I mean, the exchange for that one party might not be a good deal, but only the best choice among a bunch of choices that are all total, crap. You hit on that so many times in this book.
My dad and I used to argue about that. My dad, look, he has passed away. He was a good man. We disagreed deeply about politics. He loved Ronald Reagan. He made it in America, not necessarily, he was a traveling salesman, but to him, and he did, he made it in America. He sent us to good colleges.
Yeah.
We would fight all the time at the kitchen table about this idea of free trade, free choice, free will within capitalism. And one of the basic tenets of economics is that every free trade is made freely because the two parties leave better off. It's mutually beneficial. If so, why would Jane go to the farm if it didn't make her better off too? And that is one of the reasons why I always disagreed with the portrayal of the book, or my book, as The Handmaid's Tale of 2019.
Right.
My English publisher did this whole Subway thing with 7 Subways had these 10-foot ads quoting that from some review. But The Handmaid's Tale was you were at gunpoint. You had to carry. These women made the choice. But what does that mean when the power between those two parties is so unbalanced? And I think you can pick out those transactions throughout our society. To me, that was more interesting to explore.
Right. And the hierarchies of power and class and money and privilege in your book are also so beautifully drawn and starkly portrayed and understandable in a way that I don't think the headlines make possible. You know, this is why narrative matters, because we can understand people's quandaries and choices or lack thereof so much more interestingly, I think, with so much more nuance and so much more import when we actually know their stories. Have you anyone ever heard of the privilege walk? Do you know what that is? Maybe somebody can put it in the chat. It's a cool exercise.
I have heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
My kids did it in school, I think.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, like any age, any level, and it really kind of, it opens up interesting discussions about privilege and about power and about oppression and about hierarchies of you know, complicity and grievance, and it's a really fascinating exercise. I thought about it more than once while I was reading The Farm. One other question. Are you aware of the farm that actually exists? It's like Ina Mae Gaskin's farm in Tennessee. Was that like any kind of wink wink?
Someone put, mine really was based on the one that I read about in India and Thailand.
Okay.
And of course, I'm sure you guys read once there was a war in Ukraine. This is a huge business
Yes.
in Ukraine. And there were all of these babies stuck in Ukraine once the war happened. And it just, out of central casting, the biggest company there that does this is called Biotexcom, which I just thought was really sci-fi and creepy. I thought they would have tried to hide a little bit more what they were doing.
Yeah. Truth is stranger than fiction sometimes, isn't it? The Farm is a birthing center in Tennessee, very well-known birthing center run by an elder midwife who sort of was fundamental in bringing midwifery back from the brink of extinction, basically in the 60s and 70s. And people travel there, people who live in states where it's not legal to have a baby outside of a hospital if you want to. It's not legal to practice midwifery in the home. It's constantly changing. I know somebody who lived in Illinois. They had to leave the state to have their baby the way they wanted to outside of an institution. So people travel to the farm. It's an interesting little echo. The other question that I just wonder if you could touch briefly on is about like this idea of like dirty work, birthing, baby care, child care, house cleaning, like the people with proximity to like the dirty work, the bodies, the shit, the food, the, you know, the elemental parts of living in a body. And how that functions in your novel, and how that relates to like the commodification of human life.
Look, I think those are traditionally and historically jobs of women, and everything that women do in the home is invisible. And in a society that puts a value on you and your work based on the salary you make, of course it's overlooked, right? It's overlooked until it's outsourced, is the reality. I know women who work full time, I know as mothers, and I know mothers who don't work. I mean, what does that even mean that they don't work? They're at home taking care of their kids. My mother didn't work. She had 4 of us. She was new to this country. She completely worked. It's just that we don't see it. And it's because women have always done those roles. If somehow it was reversed, we would care and we'd put a monetary value on it that is, we probably can't even imagine. But I think you hit the nail right on the head with that it's women's work that is unseen.
Wait, do you remember a few years ago there was an Olympiad, an athlete, I forget who it was, but it was a man, and he was like praised in the media. He was like babysitting his kid. He like couldn't come to something. He was and it was like, no, that's called being a parent. You're not babysitting your kid. Anyway. Okay. Thank you. And pause. And Leni, I wonder if you will grace us with an excerpt.
Sure. And Before I read, I just want to say I'm so appreciative of this conversation so far, and Joanne, your sort of scrutiny of the economics and kind of class and race sort of foundations underneath a lot of the narratives that we have around motherhood and care and labor, and that's why I think I'm also really grateful, Elisa, you brought up the, kind of to interrogate these terms like choice, because that was, for me, one of the biggest questions I had going into writing Red Clocks was like, why, for myself, Leni Zumas, like, why did I want to become a mother? Like, why? Like, where did that desire come from? And I'm really interested even in, beyond parenthood, but like in any choices we make and the desires we have. Like, so often desire is kind of essentialized as something just like, I want that's just like what I want for my life. But where do those desires come from? Like, what sort of inherited narratives have been made so invisible that, we come to think like, oh, of course I want to get married. I mean, that was not my personal desire, but like, I think for a lot of people, that's that sense of, if I have a life partner, I'll be happier, right? And just that individual, the kind of pushing away of like anything else about money and race and gender that goes into that choice. So anyway, I really appreciate that, you guys. I'm going to read a little bit from Red Clocks, which is a book that takes place in America, where abortion has been made illegal and various kinds of like criminalization of doctors or people seeking abortions, and restriction of adoption to people who are married, et cetera, et cetera. So this passage I'm going to read kind of gives a sense of the perspective from one of the characters of kind of almost like waking up into this world. She lives by the sea, a vast, dark, luminous, perilous sea. Floors white with sailors' bones, tides stronger than any human effort. Sea stacks sleep like tiny mountains in the waves. She loves the sheer fact of how many millions of creatures the water holds, microscopic and gargantuan, alive and long dead. In eyeshot of such a sea, one can pretend things are fine at first. Notice only the cares within reach. Coyotes on Main Street, fundraising for lighthouse repairs. It's why she liked this country of pointed firs at first, how easily here she could forget the hurtling world. While she was hiding out in this rainy Arcadia, they closed the women's health clinics that couldn't afford mandated renovations. They prohibited second trimester abortions. They required women to wait 10 days before the procedure and to complete a lengthy online tutorial on fetal pain thresholds and to read about celebrities whose mothers had planned to abort them. They started talking about this thing called the Personhood Amendment, which for years had been a fringe idea, a farce. When Congress proposed the 28th Amendment to the US Constitution and it was sent to the states for a vote, she wrote emails to her representatives, marched in protests in Salem and Portland, donated to Planned Parenthood. But she wasn't all that worried. It had to be political theater, she thought, a flexing of muscle by the conservative-controlled House and Senate in league with a fetus-loving new president. 39 states voted to ratify, a 3/4 majority. She watched the computer screen splashed with this news, thought of the signs at the rallies, keep your rosaries off my ovaries, think outside my box. And the online petitions, the celebrity op-eds. She couldn't believe the Personhood Amendment had become real with all these citizens so against it. Which, the disbelief, was ridiculous. She knew it was her job as a teacher of history to know how many horrors are legitimated in public daylight against the will of most of the people.
Damn. When did you write that?
I wrote this before Trump was elected. That particular sequence, I remember thinking after he got elected, I'm like, do I need to cut this out? Like what? I wasn't really sure how the manuscript was. It had been, it had found a publisher before the election, but it hadn't, I was still revising it. But I started work on the book in 2010. And when in my research, I heard about things like the Personhood Amendment. Those had everything in the book comes from some sort of actual precedent, Paul Ryan or Mike Pence or, politicians who were already proposing these things. But again, to me, they seemed so fringe that they were just like these interesting little, like, horrors, like hanging out, like outside, and that was very much not true, as we all kind of have learned. But yeah, when I was writing it, that was the situation.
Did you freak yourself out a little bit as things unfolded? Were you like tweaking? I mean, it's a little uncanny.
I mean, I think I was so depressed, like after Trump's election, when I was doing some of the revisions on this book, that I kind of felt more like that despair than like I wasn't actually thinking as much about my manuscript. It almost made me want to like not think about my manuscripts. But I do, but that question has of course come up, since it was published, like, and since all the things, all the rights that are being taken away from people in, recent months and years, that idea of fiction being prescient, or, and same with, the question around Joanne's novel, like where is the farm actually happening? And I think for all three of our books, there are ways in which, and for many other novelists, like that future is already here, like the future that we're writing about is kind of contained, right? So, but yeah, it was horrible.
You were paying attention the whole time, and you pulled a thread, and, current events bore something very eerily similar out, but it's not like you invented it to begin with. This was in the air. This was in the water. This has been happening for a really long time. So it's like, it brings to mind another line I love from your novel, Joanne, from page 88. And it's Reagan's lost mother. It's a kind of a throwaway line, not in the current narrative. It's like a flashback. If you don't notice, you can't care, and you won't do anything that matters. She's urging her daughter to be somebody who looks around the world and notices things, and isn't complacent, and doesn't assume that, like, whatever, it's all just kind of a backdrop, that like what goes on around you is real and matters, and you have to take note if you hope to make anything or do anything or say anything or be of any help to anyone. I think that's really profound idea.
Elisa, if I can just interject, that really speaks to something you brought up earlier, the idea about things not being just theoretical, because I do think that both the reading of, probably more than, the reading of, but the writing of fiction is, these are acts of paying attention and giving it a certain quality of attention to what it is like to be in a body, that is, has been gendered and racialized and marginalized in certain ways in the world, like, but centering that body, right? Like what does that actually feel like is something I think some fiction does really well, that I'm hard put to think of any other media that can do that in the way that fiction can, because of the granular level of detail. And so anyway, it's becoming untheoretical.
Yeah.
Sorry, and I wanted to can I just say something to piggyback on what Leni said, because I've been thinking about along the lines of what you were just saying, Leni, in in this moment when politics has become so dire and it feels so important. At least I, because I've been struggling with my second book, have thought, is this what I should be doing? I'm already politically active, but should I be doing that and not making up stories? But to your point, I think the other reason, in addition to yours, why fiction is so powerful is that it is by its definition made up. And so I think people will come to books with an openness. They're disarmed because it's a leap of faith. To pick up a book that's made up, you're always taking that leap of faith anyway. And I feel like I'm never, honestly, going to read a nonfiction book or a memoir by someone I disagree with. If I know that I disagree with them politically, I probably wouldn't pick that book up. I would pick up almost every book that is supposed to be a great book. And I will pick it up with an openness to just go along for the ride. It's just made up. And in doing that, maybe my mind will see something a little different. Maybe I'll change my mind a little bit. Maybe I'll get to know a body, as you say, that I never in real life would want to know, but
Right.
I learned to understand a bit because it's fiction,
Right.
because it's not partisan, because it's not, I don't think I'm saying it well, but I do think in a way I've come around to believing that fiction really does matter. It's not like I totally gave up hope on it, but I went through some despair where I was like, maybe I should be doing something more helpful with my life.
Mhm.
Anyway.
If the novelist is doing their job, then a story about somebody with the most loathsome, distant politics imaginable would be urgent and relevant. And you say something to this end, Reese, that I want to get to in an interview that you did about your book. But okay, let's pause this because this is an important point, and we'll get back to it. And I just want to quote Ezra Pound, who came to mind, even though he was kind of an anti-Semite. And he said, fiction is news that stays news. And I think he was right, even though I disagree with him on some other things. Okay, so Leni, I just want to talk a little bit more about Red Clocks. The voice of it, the sensibility, the tone of it is so striking and so unique. You have a very terse and ironic sense of humor in this book, and it suits the characters and the setting and the quandaries therein so beautifully. Can you talk about how you landed on that very sort of elemental tone?
That I love that question. It's also so hard to answer because it's hard to like observe oneself doing I find writing so difficult. Let me just say that I find writing so difficult that like to even have a sense of what I'm doing while I'm doing it is really hard. But I do think so. One of the sort of sources of humor and maybe like darker humor that I was coming into the writing of the book with was my own experience having a body that could not get pregnant, and I wanted to get pregnant, and I was dealing with a lot of infertility issues, and I was just like having these doctor's appointments where like I would just start laughing because it was so gross and kind of I felt like I was like in like 1897, like they'd be like, well, when the uterus is corrupted. I mean, there was like all this language around the sort of failure of bodies, if you can't get pregnant, then your body has failed at its most essential task, right? That was kind of underlying so much of the medicalization of fertility treatments, that it was, I mean, I started writing this book as an essay because I was so angry about it and so sad. And so, and also I was like, why do I want to get pregnant? Like, what the fuck am I doing? It gave me a lot of time actually and I did end up getting pregnant, and I have a 10-year-old or almost 10-year-old son. But at the time I was just thinking like, this is actually absurd. This, one of the narratives that I was really contending with was about the naturalness. You mentioned like midwifery and like, and also, I live in Portland, which is a place where there's a lot of different ways that people give birth and a lot of different ways that people care for kids. And it's something I love about Portland. And there is also this, there's a lot of rhetoric of the natural, like going back to like the natural way to do things. And I happen to have a body that like nature was not like on my side, right? So like my quote unquote like natural capabilities were not something to write home about, right? And so I had this sort of, I was kind of like starting from a place of great alienation from those sorts of narratives around motherhood, and like, a lot of it's the 21st century, but people will still say like, oh, you'll know what to do because you're his mother. Like, really? Like, how about like we all help each other figure out what to do rather than like isolate people in these like lonelinesses where we're expected to like actually figure out things that, because we're, it should come natural to us, right? So I guess to give an example of, there is a sort of scene early on where this character goes into her fertility doctor and he's dressed as Slash from Guns N' Roses because it's Halloween, and he doesn't take off his sunglasses, and she's like there with her feet in the straps and like, her vulva like yawning at him, and he has these like sunglasses on. And I remember when my mom read the book for the first time, she was like, why did you choose to do like what? And I was like, that's actually the one thing that was taken directly from my life. Like that happened. There was a doctor in Portland who I really dislike to this day, who was like, he was wearing like a leather vest and like no shirt. And I'm like, I'm actually like having a really difficult experience here. Like, but anyway, so that to answer your question, Elisa, I think I was trying to kind of draw on that energy to like get it out of myself and get it maybe into the book. Yeah.
It works. Spoiler. It's awesome. Okay, pause, because we have so much more to talk about on that. And Reese, will you share a piece of the Incendiaries with us, please?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to Penn Faulkner for bringing us together for this conversation. It's really an honor to be here with writers whose work I admire so much. So I'm going to read from The Incendiaries. It was my first novel. And it's about a woman who gets involved with a group of fundamentalist Christians, and the group turns out to be a cult, and they end up bombing abortion clinics, healthcare clinics in the name of faith. And part of how I came to this book is that I grew up really Christian, so Christian that my life plan was to become a pastor. And then at 17, I left that faith. And so in some ways, I've just like remained fascinated throughout my life by differences, by just like core differences in what people believe, and in how that affects how we live with one another. So I'll just read from the first chapter, and yeah, there's nothing else to know about it. I'll read very briefly. They'd have gathered on a rooftop in Knoxhurst to watch the explosion. Platt Hall, I think, 11 floors up. I know his ego, and he'd have picked the tallest point he could. So often I've imagined how they felt waiting. With 6 minutes left, the slant light of dusk reddened the high old spires of the college, the level gables of its surrounding town. They poured festive wine into big-bellied glasses. Hands shaking, they laughed. She would sit apart from this reveling group, cross-legged on the roof's west ledge. 3 minutes to go, 2, 1. The Phipps building fell. Smoke plumed the breath of God. Silence followed, then the group's shouts of triumph. Wine glasses clashed together, flashing martial light. He sang the first bars of the Cheja psalm. Others soon joined in. Carolyn bells chimed, distant birds blowing white, strewn, like dandelion tufts in outsized wish. It must have been then that John Leal came to her side. In his bare feet, he closed his arm around her shoulders. She flinched, looking up at him. I can imagine how he'd have tightened his hold, telling her she'd done well, though before long it would be time to act again, to do a little more. But this is where I start having trouble, Phoebe. Buildings fell. People died. You once told me I hadn't even tried to understand. So here I am trying. Now let's just stop there.
Whew. Thank you. Thank you. The piece of this interview, it's a Q&A that is printed in the back of your paperback. The edition I have, page 220. Do you happen to have it in front of you? I'd rather hear it in your words your voice than my own voice.
I don't, only because I have the hardcover in front of me.
All right. Well, so pardon me if I read your own words to you, but you say, I know a lot of people are justifiably sick of being asked to empathize with the ideologues and bigots who want us dead, our rights taken, our bodies claimed as theirs. But some pro-life dogmatists truly do believe they're doing good. Some terrorists even. Rigorously agnostic though I now am, actively progressive as I strive to be, I can't forget the God-wild girl I once was, the fanatic who believed that life starts at conception, who, believing this, could have prioritized the rights of unborn fetuses over those of living women. Given this history and with and despite my personal convictions, I wanted to portray both these worldviews without dismissing one side as being utterly beyond comprehension. Yes. Wow. Thank you. So crucial and so missing from so much of our discourse. Can you tell us, elaborate a little more on the process of writing and on the process of evolving as you have from that into this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Let's see. So part of how this book came about for me is that I volunteered very briefly at Planned Parenthood and as a patient escort. And so I was walking people back and forth, just like into the clinic past protesters. And you know, the protesters who were there that day, they were like very visibly all Christian, like their signs were all about like Jesus, et cetera, et cetera. And then like, as I was walking these people, I just like experienced this like nearly physical split in my body, because I was like, you know, when I was 15, I kind of did believe what these people believe.
Mhm.
And now I so strongly believe the very opposite, that that like I'm spending my Saturday morning doing this. And so I think that was part of it. And I think I don't know, I think that you know, I'm so sympathetic to the fatigue with being asked to empathize with people who truly like want us dead and like want our bodies, and who don't care for us. And with that, I also do think that the tendency or a tendency to dismiss people who don't believe what all right, let me just, I always have trouble generalizing. I know that my tendency to dismiss people who don't believe what I believe as monsters, as just like beyond the pale of like humanity, really. It's very simple to think about people as monsters. It's very easy to think about people as monsters. Once you start thinking of other people as monsters, it's also then possible to believe that one is not capable of being a monster oneself. And I think that part of what, having been so Christian, and really like I was like an evangelical Christian, you know, like I was like a shouting in warehouse rallies kind of Christian, like even like trying to convert people at my public high school Christian. And I think part of what that has left me with is a very severe distrust of certainty. So much so that like even that statement sounds really suspicious to me, because like if I'm just like certainty is bad, then I'm like, well, that's a really certain statement. And so I think yeah, that was a really long answer, but yeah.
So basically, you're Jewish now. Have you ever read the Sally Tisdale essay from Harper's in the mid 80s? It's online, and it was published in Harper's as We Do Abortions Here, but she wanted and republished it later in her own collection as Fetus Dreams. She writes about working as a nurse at an abortion clinic in Oregon for many years, and it's a very straightforward essay. It's just sort of like, it just sort of catalogs like stuff that happens, like one, you know, this kind of thing happens, and then this usually happens, and then this happens, and it's really, she doesn't share any opinions. She doesn't, it's just, they do 100 abortions a week at this clinic, and you know, somebody's got to like empty the bucket, quite literally. And what she said about this piece is that for years and years and years after it was published, she would get mail, half of which said, I'm pro-life, I'm anti-choice. Thank you so much for writing this piece. It's so important. And the other half of which said, I'm pro-choice. Thank you so much for writing this piece. It's so important that you wrote this piece, because she managed somehow to just narrate the experiences of people who need to terminate their pregnancies without any baggage, like from her, like it's just so you can read the piece as whatever you want. It's a mirror. It's a really fascinating essay. It's really one of the best things I've ever read on abortion. I think you would find it really, really important. And the other thing that the way you speak of this brings to mind is, have you seen, there was an essay published recently in the New York Times Magazine by the writer Margaret. And she was a very religious Christian in her youth at Bible college. And this piece was called "The Abortion I Did Not Have." Highly recommend it. If somebody can throw that in the chat too. It speaks to these issues a lot. This idea that belief is static, and that anyone who's not the same as you is your enemy. It gets really, really sticky when you're a dynamic being with evolving lived experience and ideas. How does that play out for your characters?
Well, first of all, I love what you're saying about, and that Merit Tears piece is so good. I was like trying to find her email address to tell her like how amazing it was, and I couldn't find it, so I like gave up the hunt. But yeah, that piece is amazing. And I will definitely look for that other piece. Thank you. Something that I think I was thinking a lot about when I was writing this book, and something I think about a lot in general, is I think I'm increasingly alarmed by Americans' tendency to, and sure, like lots of people in other countries too, but the country I know best is America, our obsession with, again, with the generalizing, so many people in this country are like, I am a good person. And I find that to be what you were saying about like the verb versus the noun. I find that to be such a limiting point of view, and honestly, one of like our country's like original sins, if anything. The idea that you're a good person, that means that anytime you run up against criticism or an idea that challenges your worldview, that means that if it doesn't sit with how you look at the world, that means, wait, then your sense of a good person is threatened. And I feel as though, like if you so like with racism, with sexism, if you hurt someone and you're like, I'm a good person, like regardless if you hurt them, that person doesn't care whether or not you're a good person, really. For them, they're hurt. Like if you like, I don't know, like an extreme example, if you drop why am I returning to a Friends episode? I haven't really even watched that much Friends. When somebody drops a knife on someone's foot and his toe gets chopped off, like he doesn't care that was that he's not like, oh, that was a good person who chopped off my toe. He just kind of just like lost a toe. And I wish that fewer people in our country were like so attached to the static notion of I am a good person, therefore like nothing I can do is bad, therefore like I can't change. Anyway, so with this book, I was really interested in exploring really like different parts of my own psyche in some ways, like split out. So there's a character who the central narrator is somebody who falls in love with this woman who gets involved with a cult. And that woman also plays a large role in the book, and she has her own, it's a version of like whatever her own thoughts. And the book is, and it's sort of between 3 points of view. I play around a little bit with the idea of like point of view and perspective, but and the third character is a cult leader, who at least says that he has volunteered in China and working with North Korean refugees, and says that he has spent time in a gulag, and so part of it is from his point of view.
And he's like seeing all these horrors, which then these young impressionable college age kids are like kind of like, ooh, like the horrors, like there's something really seductive and perverse about that as it read to me.
Yeah. And like, and he going back to the idea of certainty, I remember reading, and because I did a lot of research into cults and into also into the history of reproductive rights in America, but in cults and religions in general, I remember as an evangelical Christian learning that that like by college is when you really want to recruit people, because like high school and college are like the most are when people are the most likely to like switch a faith, to like join a faith. And I set the novel in college in part because of that. And terrorist groups, lots and lots of different kinds of terrorist groups like to recruit at colleges. And that's a time of, it's a time when like people are very much changing. It's a liminal time. A lot of people are also away from their hometowns, away from their families, just far more likely to want to belong to something. There's that. There's also John Leal, a cult leader. Part of what he offers is a version of certainty, and certainty can be tremendously appealing to so many people.
Oh my God, yeah, certainty is so easy. Certainty is just infinitely simpler.
It must just feel like it's chiller way to live, Yeah.
And nuance is also endless. There's no end point. And it's just like, can we just put it to bed? Can we just decide what's right and what's wrong and like all go, have a beer? Nuance just doesn't leave any space for relaxing.
Yeah.
Stressful having to engage and like deal with complexities. It's really, it's not for the faint of heart.
One of my favorite quotations is Cortázar said that he's on the side of the questions, which I love so much. And I feel like that's something that in general fiction does offer. Like novelists do tend to be on the side of the questions, not the answers. Like
totally.
If we had answers, we'd probably do something else with our lives.
We'd be journalists.
Yeah.
No, journalists can be good at questions too. Good ones. I mean, good anybody is good at questions. That's the thing. No matter what your genre is, if you're not interested in the questions, you're just engaging a dead end. There's no life in it. It could be memoir, it could be history, it could be journalism, it could be poetry. Like, if it's not just a giant endless stream of questions, why?
Then you're writing Atlas Shrugged. That's what it is. You're on a soapbox. It's not lit, right? It's not, there wasn't nuance. It was one idea that she wanted to get out there. Anyway.
Sick burn.
One person's opinion about.
Yes.
And high schoolers love that book. Even high schoolers who later
That's
are like, oh God,
That's
what
right.
the fuck was I thinking?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Everybody's loving talking about Dirty Dancing and the penny abortion recently for good reason, because it's like a really memorable moment for a lot of us in our coming of age and like cultural assimilation. But remember the asshole waiter Robbie who hands baby Atlas Shrugged and says, "Read it, but return it. I've got notes in the margin." Classic. Okay. And that brings us back around to empathy, which Reese, you make such an important point about why we do what we do and what the value really is beyond entertainment, because I think we're all also entertainers to some degree. We spin yarns. We want to get people's like hearts and minds engaged. We want to make them laugh. We want to make them feel. We want to make them think. But it's that really unique way we can kind of make people empathize in ways that they otherwise maybe couldn't, in the supermarket parking lot, or wherever, with somebody who's just really different, somebody who comes from someplace really different, feels really differently, thinks really differently. It's a pretty special thing that we get to do. Go us. So I wonder if you guys have any questions for each other, anything that sparked for you, that you want to go a little deeper on. And while you think about it, there's this little bit at the bottom of page 91 in red clocks, that you touched on briefly, Leni, but I just loved this piece about why the biographer, as the character is known, Roe, wants children. But why does she want them really? Because Susan has them, her acquaintance, because the Salem bookstore manager has them, because she always vaguely assumed she would have them herself? Or does the desire come from some creaturely place, pre-civilized, some biological throb that floods her bloodways with the message, make more of yourself? Great passage. And back again to this idea of desire too, that like the difference between an unwanted pregnancy and a desperately wanted pregnancy, it's the same cluster of cells. In one case, it needs to be, rid, and in the other case, there's like quite literally no lengths to which a person might not go to get it. And the only difference is desire. That's it. There's no other difference. Do you want it or do you not want it? And it's the same entity. How bizarre is that?
Yeah. And the more kind of attention we can pay to how people, how all of us sort of come to want what we want and to have certainty about things. I mean, I completely agree with what y'all have been saying about like the solace in it, that there's a real actual need that is met, I think, by someone saying this is the truth and like you don't need to worry about, what lies outside of this, right? And I think earlier, Joanne, when you were talking about domestic labor and unpaid labor and sort of work that is not recognized as work, like I just think of like all of the like advertising power and cultural narratives and family narratives that go into sort of romanticizing like being like a homemaker, right? Like taking care of your kids and like just feeding them the best things you can think of, and like the sort of the farm is actually, I mean, that idea that like, okay, you'll just like do everything you can to like have the perfect baby. I mean, I think that that kind of inculcation happens all the time, right? That like if you just do the right set of things, like you will be happy, right? And then to read stories about people who, because I think empathy is a tricky word, right? Because sometimes it kind of gets mashed together with like relatability. It's like, oh, I finally could relate. That person's different from me, but then I can relate. But like, I think there are also a lot of amazing books where I'm not going to relate. I mean, I'm thinking Lolita is an obvious example, but I mean, there's a lot more recent examples where like it's not that I want to feel or do or think the same things as that that narrator, but it's also that I also want to be in this world and feel curious about it, right? So like, how does curiosity get animated, get activated by fiction?
You get to walk in somebody else's shoes. I mean, I don't know of another way you can really do that in such a sustained way as in a novel. It's you get to inhabit somebody else's experience, consciousness. What am I missing? Where else can we do that? I guess in a movie to some degree, in a limited way, but it's a different, pictures are different, the brain processes them differently.
And in in the question of reproductive rights and reproductive justice, I think it's there are these really entrenched narratives that fiction, among other things, can chip away at. And one of them is like this sort of abortion regret myth, right? That like abortion is always traumatic and it's always terrible. And like, Hillary and Bill Clinton being like, it should be safe, legal, and rare. And like, why should it be rare? Like, why does it have to be traumatic? Like, why, for some people it's traumatic, for some, I think there's a lot of that kind of unexamined storytelling around that directly relates to how legislation happens. Because
Right.
if enough people are like, oh yeah, no one wants to get an abortion, then maybe we shouldn't have them, right? I mean, that's really reductive, but that kind of regret, the after school special about like,
Yeah.
the high school girl who like is going to kill herself because she's pregnant, and doesn't want to have an abortion.
Yeah. I mean, it's not going to solve the larger political problems, but the sharing of stories really does chip away at ignorance. It's, once you have like imbibed or digested a powerful narrative, you can no longer see an issue the same way. And with each successive narrative about or around that issue, you become changed irrevocably. It is no longer theoretical. And whether it's somebody next door or your cousin's friend's sister's friend or a novel, it's actually like a pretty profound matriarchal tradition, the sharing of stories orally, long before there was writing, which is also a dangerous idea because it gets into kind of like, well, what's the facts? If it wasn't written down, if it's not codified, how do we know? It's where the idea of an old wives' tale comes from. These sort of common sense things that now we get scientific studies confirming that the singing of lullabies does help children seem to sleep better. Like we've been sharing stories and wisdom and anecdotes and helping each other through basic tenets of living in these reproductive bodies for as long as we've been on this planet, and the more we refuse to be estranged from that process and from each other in that process, the less power politicians have to sell us lies. I think that might be too simplistic, but I'm going to stick to it. Okay, we have some questions. For all the writers, which authors inspire your work? Reese, I love your anecdote about praying to Virginia Woolf as you were trying to complete the Incendiaries. But who else?
It's funny, this came up when I was doing the book talk with Reese, because we had both been reading Woolf's A Writer's Diary, right? Oh, anyway, I was reading Woolf's A Writer's Diary when I wrote The Farm, and I still read it before I write most days. But the other book is it's called Beyond the Beautiful Forevers by Catherine Boo. It's actually a nonfiction book. She lived in a slum in India, and it was just so beautiful. It was written like fiction, like a novel. And she writes about a lot of the issues that I'm interested in, the questions I'm interested in. So those would be the two books that really inspired me.
Wonderful. What about you, Leni?
I'll just say number 3 for the Wolf. If I was pressed to name a favorite writer, she would definitely be it. And same with the Writer's Diary, A Writer's Diary. And I've been reading a lot of Roland Barthes, a lot of sort of nonfiction like Barthes and Fred Moten, and people writing about ways to like organize ourselves in the world that do not kind of reproduce the like heteronuclear family or the sort of kind of traditional like embedded power relations, and that's something really I'm just really curious about right now, and looking for texts about that.
Down with the nuclear family. Yes, I'm with you. Reese, what else?
Also, yeah, thirding the Wolf's writer stories are so good, or her journals in general are like such good company when you're working. I think it's like 6 or 7 volumes, and I was like so heartbroken getting to the end of the first read, but of course a reread is always available, and it's right there. Multiple rereads. But let's see, some books that have been meaning a lot to me lately. Solma Sharif's Customs is amazing. It's a book of poetry, and she writes like really powerfully about her suspicion of the whole notion of empathy, and of the whole notion of what that can do. Natalie Diaz's post-colonial love poem is something I return to a lot. Gorgeous, incredible, powerful poetry. A couple of more recent books, actually, Soma's is recent too, but a couple of recent ones are Ingrid Rojas-Contreras' The Man Who Could Move Clouds, which is a memoir, and it's stunning. And one that just came out last week, Margaret Wilkerson-Sexton's On the Rooftop is really powerful and amazing.
Awesome. I have been reading Benjamin Labatut's When We Cease to Understand the World. I think he's Chilean. It's really beautiful, very intense. And I also just gobbled up Emmanuel Carrère's autofiction, Yoga, fascinating, really like his style. And I'm working on a lot of short stories these days, and I'm loving J. California Cooper, who died in the 90s. She's very like Lucia Berlin. She's got a really unpretentious style that I resonate with a lot right now. So that's what I've been reading. I mean, historically, I'm like a Philip Roth fiend. That sense of immediacy and brutality and just going way too far for the sake of argument always appealed to me in his fiction. I just feel like it's a really important artistic model. There's like no political consciousness or correctness, I should say. He just doesn't give a shit, and I find that really important. Kelly Midgley wonders how you think your works interrogate or engage with Atwoods. Joanne, I know you love that question.
I think I already answered. I mean, it really, my interest was more on how free a free choice is in our society when one, because of one's race or class or economic status, does not have the power of the other person in the party. There's no one right answer to that, because I've talked to readers who believe that Mayu was right and the farm was a great thing because it helped these women change their lives. Honestly, I was a little surprised sometimes when I met people saying that, and I'd meet other people who felt that these women were being exploited. And what was interesting is that in 2019, when the book came out, it's when the New York State legislature was debating whether or not to legalize commercial surrogacy in New York. There were only 2 states that didn't allow it, New York being one of them. So my friends who used surrogates before it was legalized would go elsewhere, to North Carolina or whatever. And it was Gloria Steinem and some feminist groups and conservatives who were against commercial surrogacy because they believe that women, like the women in the farm, would be exploited. And it was gay rights activists and other people who believed that it should be legal, right? So it's to all of your points, there is no certainty to any of this stuff. It depends from what position you're coming from. And the hard part is that you can have both of those positions be true for those groups and coexist, and you just have to still move forward and make a decision anyway. So
totally. And you know, Atwood was writing about something very dystopian. It's a little silly to compare the farm to The Handmaid's Tale, because what the farm portrays is happening. It's here. It's, you know, the Kardashians probably run one in Calabasas. It's not theoretical, it's not futuristic, it's not dystopian. People with way, way, way more money than they know what to do with hire other people to bear children for them. It's just a simple fact of life at this point in our culture, in our caste, not my caste, but this country's collective caste. Anyway, I feel your frustration with the ad campaign on the tube. Leni, what about you?
What I would say about Margaret Atwood and Handmaid's Tale is my book as well was sort of compared with that in the marketing, and I understand why that happened, and I didn't agree with it, but I could see why it was being done. What I am grateful about is that I think in the last several years, like since our books have come out and many others have come out, there's a much broader sense of like ways to tell stories about reproductive justice that are not, don't have Atwood as their origin story, because there are other sort of foremothers among writers, like Octavia Butler being an obvious one that she doesn't get talked about as much as Atwood, but there's many others, and I think people are starting to learn more about them, and also to kind of like find 21st century ways to tell these stories, and that seems like a good thing.
Yeah, if your only context is a novel from the 80s, you maybe have some work to do. Reese, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, and building off of that, or it is also true that that very much so that for instance, for a Black woman, the idea of forced birth, that's not fantastical at all. Slavery was not out of that. That's not fantasy. That happened for a very long time. And so, yeah, I think that I think that I guess I would say that this is sort of like a centering of the Handmaid's Tale is also a centering of whiteness and of white bodies, and so that would be my addition, I guess.
Yeah. So industry leaders, it's time to move on, with all due respect to Atwood and her work as a whole, and in particular.
What are we on season 4 of The Handmaid's Tale?
I don't know. I don't engage with that.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I think
Godspeed.
it's like a million seasons. Yeah.
God bless. Godspeed. Okay, we have a question here about politics that inform narrative, and how we propel story and not fall into polemic. That's a really hard one. I think. Reese, you want to take that one?
Sure. Let's see. I think I find in general, with fiction, that fiction, at least my fiction, when I write fiction, it actually resists polemic in a lot of ways, because characters are people, and I follow characters and what they do. I think there's a very worrying, I know I'm not the only one thinking this, a very worrying conflation in how people are talking about literature, of what an author believes about the world and what their characters are up to. And so, like this just like comes up over and over and over again. It's like, well, like this character, this book has like, I don't even know, this character has like there's a character who is a really bad person. They're just, going back to the idea of static definitions, there's a serial killer there's a serial killer in this novel, therefore the author is bad. Like this is like so simplistic and so wild. And I think because a novel is full of characters, and because characters are human, and because it's full of human beings, I just don't think that a book I just don't think that fiction lends itself very well, or at least the kind of fiction I'm interested in doesn't tend to lend itself very well to polemic. That said, of course, like words mean things and narratives mean things. And I think something that how do I say this? I think something I try to be very conscious of in my writing is without sort of like imposing my worldviews on the characters, just trying to be very, very intentional about the language I use and how how like the words are used. And so for instance, something that I'm again far from the first person to do this, but this is a minor thing, but it's not minor at all, I think, to me, is a sort of a common tendency in American letters to note a character's race when they're not white, and then to never note it when a character is white. That already comes from a default position of like, okay, white is the default, white is unraised, white is not a color. And so in my fiction, especially if I'm writing from the point of view of somebody who is themselves a color, then that's just never going to be something that I'm going to be interested in doing. That's a really minor point, but
no, it's fascinating and it's important. Joanne.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that I love James Baldwin, and one of the things he says about art is that its purpose is to lay bare the questions hiding behind the answers. And if that at all resonates with you as a writer, it definitely does with me. It does, in the words of Reese, resist polemic, right? Because you're trying to tease out, you're trying to explore a question. You're uncertain to start with. And I was interested in writing The Farm because of questions I have. That some of them were personal and some of them were about the system that we live in and how we could live together maybe better, but I had no answers, and I still don't know that I could say that I do, so I think if you approach writing with a question at its heart, and humility that you don't know everything, it does resist polemic, that process.
Yeah. Leni?
I would just add in this response to another of the questions we haven't gotten to about the novel form being a kind of like container of like bourgeois selfhood and individualism. I think narrative structure itself can be kind of polemical in that it reinforces like a particular understanding of like how change happens or what it means, like, what a successful story is, or if there's even resolution at all. And so I think for me as a reader, especially, like I want to really surround myself with work that experiments with narrative in all kinds of ways and with point of view, as Reese was mentioning, like kind of interrogating the unity or the sort of authority of certain kinds of more traditional points of view and storytelling. And so I think it's also about reading.
Yeah, reading, a lost art. That's a great question. The one that you just asked, that you referred to in the chat here from Anonymous, regarding, how we work around the sort of the narrative norms that bolster us versus them individualism that plagues our political discourse. I'm reading from this question. I think that's a really interesting question, because if we are ever going to be honest about human beings or any particular human being in a story, one of the fundamental characteristics of us as a species is that we're really petty and tribal. We really are. Even the best of us, in our sort of essentialist nature, we are inheritors of a tendency, a sort of species-wide tendency to want to beat the other, want to win, want to be supreme, want power, whatever that looks like. And power is like a weird shapeshifter too. it's a fractal enterprise, you know, in a room full of people who are very oppressed, like there will be a leader, you know, and in a room full of like the winners of the earth, there will be a scapegoat. And I think like once we start getting down and dirty with human nature and with what it means to walk through the world with one of these minds and one of these bodies, we have to engage with like our stupid petty nature. You know, that's kind of just who we are on some level. We transcend it occasionally, but not always. What do you guys think? Anyone?
Well, something I think a lot about is how a lot of writers have said this too, but you know, there's the idea that if finding in a book like some of like your worst thoughts and your worst tendencies and finding them written down, your pettiest thoughts, your just like the shittiest like parts of yourself, finding that in a book, for me at least, is can provide such solace, and can provide such like a way out of solitude. And for me at least, I think I love books so much in part because I was just a lonely fucking kid, and I found so much friendship and companionship and shared humanity in books. And I think that's something that I'm always interested in doing with a novel is I'm always writing for that girl who like felt like the loneliest girl in the world, and for people who feel that way. I don't know that that quite answers the question, but
I think that's a beautiful, beautiful answer to the question. And if anyone has anything to add, please do. But if not, I think that's a gorgeous place to end. Anyone have any last thoughts they want to share? All right. Well, thank you so much for participating in this conversation. It's been mind expanding and heart expanding. And thank you to Penn Faulkner for having us all here together. And thank you, Leni, Reese, and Joanne for these incredible books. I have really, really cherished my time with them in tandem, and they will live together on my shelf forevermore in memory of this beautiful evening together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elisa. And thank you,
so
Penn
much.
Faulkner.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Elisa. And I just want to thank Joanne, Leni, and Reese again for sharing your insights and your perspectives with all of us tonight. We are so thrilled that you all were able to participate in this. My name is Caroline Schreiber, and I'm Penn Faulkner's Director of Development. I'm here to thank all of you tonight for making our work possible. Because of your generosity, Penn Faulkner is able to serve thousands of readers and writers and students each year through all of our education, literary, and award programs. If you enjoyed tonight's conversation, and we hope you did, we hope you'll make a donation to support Penn Faulkner's work across the literary community. Details can be found in the chat, and every amount helps us to connect readers and writers and to celebrate amazing literature. Whether you choose to make a one-time gift or set up a monthly recurring donation, thank you so much for your support. Beyond tonight, we have a full year of exciting programming planned for you. Our next literary conversation, which is coming up on October 6th, will explore the impact of gun violence in America. We hope you'll join us for what promises to be another really thought-provoking discussion. That'll be moderated by Glory Edom, founder of Well Read Black Girl. More information is in the chat, and it'll also hit your inboxes tomorrow. Thank you again to all of our writers for joining us, and to all of you in the audience for your listening and your really insightful questions this evening. We hope to see you all again very, very soon. Good night.